Welcome. I'm Tracy Smith, and this is Here Comes the Sun, a closer look at some of the people, places, and things we bring you every weekend on Sunday morning. Actor Jude Law has what they call in showbiz range. He's played complicated psychological villains and romantic comedy leads. But despite once being named People magazine's sexiest man alive, heartthrob is a role he never wanted. Law reflected on how his looks may have shaped his career with our Lee Cowan.
You're beautiful.
He was almost too good-looking, one might argue.
It sounds like even you at sometimes were wondering if roles were because of the way you looked or because of your performance.
It's a funny one, isn't it? Because as soon as I engage in that sort of consideration, it's like I'm acknowledging that I have really good looks.
Right.
I've got to a point now where I look back at photos of myself, which I know I don't look like anymore, and I am able to say, oh no, I was really pretty. I was really, really pretty when I was in my 20s.
Later in the show, Jude Law on learning how to sword fight for his role as Captain Hook in the film Peter Pan and Wendy.
Did you really, when you were Captain Hook, I read you learned to sword fight with your left hand?
I did. Well, I had to.
Because
so
the
in
hook
the
on
book,
yeah.
in the book, of course, it's his right hand that's cut off because he would have been fighting Peter like this and Peter's cut it off. So he has to learn with his left and he uses the hook. And I think they switched it in the animated version. I think in the animated version it's his left and he fights with his right. So we learned, I mean, that's what I was doing during COVID lockdown.
Really?
I was sent all these beautiful little practice videos from the swordsman, head swordsman, sword master, and I'd be sat there learning my different routines. Yeah. By the way, this is one of those skills. I'm sure if you gave me a sword now, I'd look amateur. At the time, you just drill and drill and drill, you know, until you get it right.
Then, from Jude Law's career in front of the camera to behind the scenes of an internet cooking show. Growing up as an immigrant in North America, Kevin Pang rebelled against his family's Chinese culture, driving a wedge between himself and his father, Jeffrey. But decades later, they reconnected over food, cooking up a renewed bond using traditional recipes from Hong Kong.
Father and son reminisce their way through Asian markets.
Here we go.
And of course, they cook.
Give it a smell, Martha.
Kevin finally gets that with each ingredient, each dish, they're retelling their story, preserving it.
That's all coming up right here on Here Comes the Sun. As a British actor, portraying royalty seemed like an obvious fit for Jude Law. He was once Shakespeare's Prince Hamlet, and in his latest role, he embodies England's tempestuous king, Henry VIII. But what makes his characters distinctive is his determination to find their humanity, as he told our Lee Cowan.
If you've ever wondered if a person can really remain anonymous in New York City, Jude Law just might be proof.
Do you get recognized a lot, or do you try to?
No. That depends.
It depends, because just which of his varied looks would you recognize? He's played playboys.
Everybody should have one talent. What's yours?
Witty writers.
Every word matters.
No, it doesn't.
They're vital. Vital.
Fairy tale pirates.
Speak not to me of hands, Smee.
And storied sidekicks.
I've been reviewing my notes on our exploits over the last 7 months. Would you like to know my conclusion?
At 51, Jude Law rarely retraces the cobblestones of his past, and yet, on this day, bathed in the red of the Ethel Barrymore Theater in the heart of Broadway,
Most extraordinary.
he couldn't help it.
All these memories come flooding back, sitting there, waiting to be revisited.
It was here back in 1995 when Law, just 23, made his Broadway debut.
I remember going to the theatre manager, though, saying, like, do I pay my rent for the next month? And he was like, I don't know, kid.
The play was Indiscretions.
But I should really... No. You lead the way.
It earned 9 Tony nominations, including one for Law's performance.
Did you think when you started out that the stage seemed a more probable career than movies?
Absolutely. Film felt so distant, so abstract from my life in London, in southeast London. Alas, poor Yorick. I knew him.
Hamlet is almost a rite of passage for an English stage actor, and when Law played it, he got another Tony nod.
You said Hamlet was one of the hardest things you've ever done? One of the most challenging things?
Certainly. You're on stage for about 85, 90% of the play, I would say. You have these 8 enormous soliloquies. Being scared of taking on something like that is natural, and part of that should be the motivation for taking it on.
Playing royals seems part of his acting DNA.
Hail King Vortigern!
He's played fictional rulers, renowned rulers, and currently one of the most reviled, King Henry VIII, husband to 6 wives, 2 of whom he had executed.
They know what would happen.
We would have to have their head cut off.
I have a theory that he was a romantic, really fell in love, and had no idea, of course, that his love life would go down this path of wreck and ruin and murder.
He's unrecognizable in Firebrand, the story of Henry's last wife, Catherine Parr.
Now death is on your soul.
Take the horse.
I'm sorry. What? I'm so sorry. I don't know.
Any of the actions, whether they be aggressive, grotesque, lewd, they had to come from a reason, and they had to come, I think, from a sense of truth. It's always about that, really.
The vengeful King Henry VIII.
Part of finding that truth was getting at the humanity of just who Henry was. He was a man of war, yes.
You realise what we drag these poor beasts into.
Right. But here at the Arms and Armor Gallery at New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art, curator Edward Hunter pointed Law to a suit of armor actually worn by the king himself that shows evidence of the crippling pain in his legs, probably from a jousting accident.
Unlike many of the other armors around the galleries, it doesn't go all the way down on his legs.
No.
He chose this armor specifically for comfort.
The open wounds were exactly around there, they think, weren't they,
Yeah.
on the lower legs?
Couldn't get on my horse. In front of all my men, it was humiliating.
That pain must have, his temperament probably rose and fell, and I think that really coloured who he was.
Growing up, the arts were everywhere. His parents were both teachers, but also performers. To them, Law's entrance into the arts wasn't a surprise, but his ensuing fame was.
What do they think of all your success? They've been around to see it all, which is great. Some people don't have that.
I guess, yes, indeed. I think it was a big thing for them to sort of understand. There's a certain public ownership that you suddenly feel you give up to this public persona.
Actor Jude Law testified at Britain's phone hacking trial on Monday.
In the mid-2000s, he lost all ownership of his private life. For years, his phone was being hacked by the tabloid news of the world, and every private conversation became public.
I mean, it seemed like who you were and the relationship you were in. I mean, there was really, at some point, it felt like there had to be nothing left to write about your personal life.
I certainly felt like that. At the time, was like weathering a storm, and it dissipates and you learn from it and you adapt and your life moves on. It's been hard, I think, is in the UK, the media have rehashed stories that are 20, 25, some of them 30 years old. They'd been through every garment in my laundry basket, and there was no more dirty
No more
linen.
dirty laundry.
It was like, that's done.
Not surprisingly, these days, he and his current wife, Philippa Cohn, try to live a very private life.
We're on a great adventure together, and I feel hugely supported by her. Being a dad is a big part of that.
They have 2 young children, adding to the 5 Law had before. Having a famous dad is one thing. Having one voted as the sexiest man alive, well, that's another.
Come here. You're beautiful.
He was almost too good-looking, one might argue.
It sounds like even you sometimes were wondering if roles were because of the way you looked or because of your performance.
It's a funny one, isn't it? Because as soon as I engage in that sort of consideration, it's like I'm acknowledging that I have really good looks.
Right.
I've got to a point now where I look back at photos of myself, which I know I don't look like anymore, and I am able to say, oh no, I was really pretty. I was really, really pretty when I was in my 20s.
Amanda, are you by any chance at all into hot chocolate?
He could have made a living doing rom-coms, but he planned accordingly to do just the opposite.
I found my own path to try and really establish myself as an actor as opposed to a heartthrob. It felt like the long game.
He started seeking out roles portraying the unfortunate, the seemingly irredeemable.
I'm pathetic. I don't belong here. I'm a monster. I'm a dinosaur.
I'm something of a rarity. How's that? I shoot the dead. Dead bodies.
Henry VIII is just the latest in a long line of the tortured and textured characters he so enjoys inhabiting. And while many think they may know Jude Law, the person, he still says most haven't got a clue.
I quite like there always to be an element of surprise, that people don't know me well enough to be able to say, oh, this is just like him, or...
You don't really want people to know the private side.
I'd rather they didn't. I think that's part of the fun of being an actor. There's a magic to it that you can't always dissect or understand until you're sort of in it, doing it, and then you reflect and think, how did that come about?
After the break, an exclusive excerpt from Lee Cowan's chat with Jude Law, something you can only see right here on Here Comes the Sun. Stay with us.
The advice to really relish what's happening to you in the moment and enjoy it.
As promised, here's more from Lee Cowan's interview with Jude Law.
What did you, I mean, he seems like he's so well known to history, and yet there's still so many questions about Henry VIII as well, right?
I think that was one
He's
of the
known
reasons.
but not known.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was one of the reasons I was intrigued to play him. And perhaps to answer that, I would say that there's an interesting conundrum in that the more books I read, the more I realized there were actually only a certain number of facts known.
Yeah.
And therefore, there's an awful lot of interpretation woven in between these facts by each historian or writer. And that afforded me an opportunity to interpret it myself, or him myself, and colour in, as you say, the unknown parts. I mean, there's a sort of silhouette that we all know, you know?
Yeah.
And there are these chapters to him. And obviously, his relationship with the different wives, which again, in their own right, are like a different chapter or a different page in his life. Yeah. It did feel straight away that we were dealing with a chapter that hadn't really had a lot of light thrown on it, and specifically really trying to understand Catherine Parr's ability to outthink, outsmart, survive this tyrant.
Did you really, when you were Captain Hook, I read you learned to sword fight with your left hand?
I did. Well, I had to.
Because
so in the book, in the book, of course, it's his right hand that's cut off, because he would have been fighting Peter like this, and Peter's cut it off. So he has to learn with his left, and he uses the hook. And I think they switched it in the animated version. I think in the animated version, it's his left, and he fights with his right. So we learned. I mean, that's what I was doing during COVID lockdown.
Really?
I was sent all these beautiful little practice videos from the swordsman, head swordsman, sword master, and I'd be sat there learning my different routines. Yeah. By the way, this is one of those skills. I'm sure if you gave me a sword now, I'd look amateur. At the time, you just drill and drill and drill, you know, until you get it right.
How much did your world open up after The Talented Mr. Ripley? Is that sort of,
I mean,
like a watershed moment for you?
Transformed, absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely. I'd already carried on working. It wasn't like I did Ripley and then stopped and Ripley came out and everything started, but it just felt like the beginning of an extraordinary wave of opportunity and attention. I mean, suddenly people are watching, which means you feel, or I certainly felt, alerted to raise my game. Equally, you're being given opportunities with people who have, you know, incredible experience, and you're working with some of the best that there are out there, and that itself raises your game. But it was an amazing couple of years on the back of the success of Ripley and the nomination I got for it. And I look back on it, again, it's like talking about having a Tony nomination at 23. at the same time, part of me wishes now, in my 50s, part of me wishes I'd really understood with maturity how to sort of go, this is very important. This is a very special chapter in your life.
Do you have any advice that you would give your younger self now when you look back?
The advice to really relish what's happening to you in the moment and enjoy it presently is something I still say to myself, but would certainly pass on to a younger me. But you know, life is made up of these incredibly bold decisions one makes. You know, we all make great decisions. We make the wrong decision. We take the right turn, we take the wrong turn. We fall down, we pick ourselves up, we learn from our mistakes, and we keep moving forward. Now, if you keep going back and making the same mistake, or if you keep falling, then obviously, you know, you're not necessarily learning or adapting. To me, it's about moving on and letting the past make you, create you as the person you are in the present. And hopefully the person you are in the present has learned from that.
Up next, a recipe for healing. Welcome back. Martha Teichner introduces us to father-son cooking show hosts Jeffrey and Kevin Pang. The pair healed a decades-long rift by reconnecting over traditional Chinese dishes. They've even turned their family recipes, painstakingly compiled and brought from China, into a cookbook to share with families everywhere.
Lastly, we have
honey.
Honey. Are you calling me honey?
Oh, yes.
All right.
The peacemaking power of food.
All right, let's rock and roll. It's shrimp time.
Take one, Mark.
It was fully on view as Kevin Pang
Dun, 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 dun.
and his dad, Jeffrey, prepared to shoot an episode of their YouTube show. Hunger Pangs. Hunger Pangs.
Honey water shrimp is your mom's favorite. So that's why I come up with this recipe, is because I want to make your mom happy.
All these shrimp.
Working through their recipe for honey walnut shrimp at the studios of America's Test Kitchen in Boston, where the show was produced.
You want to toss it?
You'd never know that it's taken more than 30 years to get to this point.
If you were an immigrant kid, you're living in America, you do everything that you can to fit in, to try to be American, and part of that is rebelling against your childhood, against your culture.
And what happened to your relationship with your dad?
It deteriorated, and it's because I refused to speak Chinese at home.
Kevin Pang was 6 when the family emigrated from Hong Kong to Toronto, eventually moving to Seattle, where Jeffrey opened an export business.
My language is a big barrier for me. I don't know how to talk to my son because he very quickly entered into this Western world.
The slightest provocation, I think, would set things off. And look, you have 2 headstrong males, you know, it just makes for a pretty fiery situation.
Over time, contact between them became a perfunctory weekly phone call.
Just say hi and bye, no fighting.
That is, until Kevin became a food writer for the Chicago Tribune.
I had a reason now to call my pops and say, hey, what is red braised pork belly? Now we'd have these half-hour conversations.
And then, in 2012, to Kevin Pang's amazement, his food-loving dad took to YouTube. 2.2 million views and counting, with Chinese cooking demonstrations, punctuated with nods to a shared history Kevin had ignored. Everything he could never say in person flooded out in a New York Times article in 2016.
To bare my soul in front of my family, it's just this inconceivable, just horrific idea. But to do so like in a national newspaper, I have no problem with that.
Jeffrey Pang's response?
Hi, Kevin. This is a good and true story. Thank you. Call me sometime. Dad.
Now,
we make fried chicken with shrimp paste. It is fantastic.
Father and son reminisce their way through Asian markets.
Okay, here we go.
And of course, they cook.
Give it a smell, Martha.
Kevin finally gets that with each ingredient, each dish, they're retelling their story, preserving it.
So this is the book.
Yes.
For a year before they left Hong Kong in 1988,
And then some kind of dessert.
Catherine and Jeffrey Pang collected family recipes.
From his parents, my parents, and all the relatives.
Afraid they would lose their heritage.
I still can recall the moment they taught us how to cook a specific dish. It's our treasure.
Some of those recipes have found their way into the cookbook.
Ooh.
Jeffrey and Kevin Pang published together.
Yes.
This was the moment.
Yeah, what do you think?
They saw a finished copy.
So good.
Yeah?
For the first time last fall.
Today, my dreams come true.
Food is our common language. That's the language that we speak. That's what we can talk about. And who would have thought?
I'm Tracy Smith. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you here next time on Here Comes the Sun.